House Speaker Mike Johnson announced this week that all single-sex facilities in the Capitol and the House office buildings are going to be reserved for individuals of that biological sex. The announcement on Wednesday was made after South Carolina Congresswoman Nancy Mace introduced a resolution to ban biological men from using women's private protected facilities, such as bathrooms and locker rooms, all on federal property. Well, although Mace had before then been considered an LGBT ally, her latest move has supporters of the movement now labeling her as anti-trans. Well, should we be surprised at all by that? And how in the world did we even get to this point? That's probably the bigger question. Well, joining me now to discuss this is Dr. Carrie Gress. She's the founder and co-editor of the online women's magazine, Theology of Home, and she's also the author of nearly a dozen books, including her latest, The End of Woman, How Smashing the Patriarchy Has Destroyed Us. Dr. Gress, welcome to Washington Watch. It's an honor to have you.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
All right, so let's begin with your take on the bathroom battle that we're seeing waged on the nation's Capitol.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. I think it's really amazing that Nancy Mace was so brave to stand up for that and really stood firm on it. And the fact that Speaker Johnson has instituted only biological men and women can be in appropriate bathrooms. I think that is a huge win for us to start pushing back on the trans craziness that we are certainly dealing with. I know as a mother, this is obviously a concern in places like Target and, thinking about sports and whatnot. So I think it feels like a really great step in the right direction.
Yeah, trans craziness, I think, is a great description of it. I've been there myself in some of the hearings that have taken place and have just literally been stunned with some of the answers that I've heard. So let me ask you, among some of the answers that I personally have heard and many others in some of these hearings, why are people so afraid to say what a woman is?
Yeah, I know it's crazy that we're having this conversation that we can't answer that question. The answer is actually, fortunately, it's been growing for about 200 years. I think it really resides with the notion of feminism. I think we've thought of feminism as something that's been very good for women, and unfortunately, feminism has really promoted this idea of women being independent from husbands and from children, and really making work the goal and the ideal for women's lives. And so we've been groomed, and I think that's actually the right word for the last 50 years, to being told that we're going to be happiest if we act like men and not good men. So this has really pushed women to think of themselves in these male contexts. But what we've lost really is this sense of motherhood. And we can see that in the birth rates today. We can see that certainly in the abortion issue. So the push has been to really get women to think and behave more like men. And so from there, it's a very natural step then to start just changing things biologically on a different level, start chopping off body parts and injecting hormones to live with this myth that somehow we can actually entirely change our genders.
Yeah, that's amazing. Would you bring up some time frames there that I don't think most people are aware of? This battle, is, according to what you were just saying, this has been going on for a long, long time. So let's hit on that. In your latest book, The End of Woman, you talk about this whole issue of without feminism, we would not even be where we are right now in this current situation. Yeah. So explain some of that to us. How did we get to the point that we are now literally erasing women?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. I was really startled to discover in my research that first wave feminism actually had a lot more to do with this problem than we realized, because first wavers really thought that the problem was Christianity, the family, and motherhood. And if we could just get rid of these things, then we would, open up women to something entirely new and wonderful that we couldn't even describe, because we've been so sequestered, if you will, in those institutions. And so that's really where it started. And then in the 1900s, you started seeing a connection with communism. So you take these radical ideas of the early feminists, and then you add communism, which is really focused on work and the worker, and certainly not on fertility, not on the family, not on Christianity. And all of those things kind of came together. And Betty Friedan, I think, is probably the best example of changing the narrative, where she actually called the home a comfortable concentration camp, and really encouraged women in any way possible to get out and do productive work. And my research also really revealed how much of a communist Friedan was. She was a closet communist, but she was absolutely focused on trying to get women out of the home and doing productive work, so there could be this communist revolution that so many, that we're focused on that effort we're trying to push for. So it's remarkable when you start seeing a history, but then it sort of starts making sense of how it is that the push then suddenly, when you open up this idea that sex doesn't mean anything, monogamy doesn't mean anything, children are an obstacle to us, then you really just create these people who are genderless, that are disconnected from their fertility, and therefore it's very easy to sort of create new genders and enter into this bizarre world where it seems like every day there's a new gender that we need to sort of add to the flag.
Totally bizarre world. So tell me how, because I have some people ask this from time to time, how does feminism in the LGBT agenda work against biological women, and obviously against a biblical understanding of womanhood?
Sure. Well, as you mentioned before, we would not have ended up with LGTB and wokeness without feminism, because feminism really latched on to this idea of the Marxist idea that there's an oppressor and the oppressed. And instead of it making it class society, class warfare like Marx saw, the feminists were able to leverage that male and female. So men are automatically oppressors. Women are the victors, or the victims rather. And so what happened then when the LGBT movement started to get a foothold is they started articulating their cause as that of victimhood, along with the same way that women had. So even though no one had actually been doing oppressing or was oppressed, that was the response. And so that's how we got to the LGBT being this sort of privileged minority, and then adding on to it just keeps getting pushed. The window keeps getting bigger of the Overton window of making more and more radical ideas getting pushed out into the public discourse.
Dr. Carrie Gress, thank you so much. This is fascinating information. I want to encourage everyone to get a copy of your book, your latest book, The End of Woman. Thank you so much for the incredible work you've done, and thank you for joining us today on Washington Watch.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.